My father introduced me, and now it's my son's turn. Woodworking is a passion we'll share forever. Woodcraft understands that. Their people know the right tool for the job, and they make sure we understand how to use it. Their help? It means a lot. Woodcraft knows how we feel because they feel the same way. You know, I enjoy sharing my secrets, and now Jake's teaching me some things too. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.
Tight Bond Wood Glues, the pro's advantage.
Hello and welcome to another episode of I Can Do That. I'm your host, Chad Stanton, and today's project is this hall table. I remember having a hall table just like this growing up at my mom's house. Every day I came in and put my school books and house key on it, and I thought I wanted one for my own home, so I made one just like it. This table, it has some gradually tapered legs that come up, giving it an elegant look to it. Also too, I'm going to show you how I'm going to attach the aprons to the legs. And then the drawers are a little bit different than what we've done in the past. First we have this routed profile edge on the front, and the sides are actually going right to the front piece, a little bit different. Now after I made this, I realized that I could easily modify this to fit the I Can Do It format. So let me bring my bench back in here and I'll show you how to start building this little hall table. The first thing I'm going to work on is the top. Now I want to point out that I have poplar here and the original is cherry. The reason I'm using poplar is I'm going to use a dark ebony stain on this, so I'm not worried about the color variation on the poplar wood. Also too, that the top is made up of a 1x8 and a 1x6, and that's going to be pretty close to our final dimensions when it's done, which are included at the end of this video on the plans. But I will wind up ripping down this edge to get the dimension I need, and I also left this a little bit long because when I clamp it up, it could shift back and forth. This way I can cross cut it to the final size. Now, when I'm going to join these boards together, the first thing I want to make sure is that there was no gaps between them. So, if you find that you have some gaps, you can use your block plane and then double check it with the square to make sure that it's going to be a good joint. The other thing too is I'm using pipe clamps to hold this together. And sometimes the glue, when it hits the steel on the pipe clamp, well, it can leave an ugly stain on the board. So to prevent that, I've put some tape down where the seam will be. When I'm putting the glue on, I want just enough for some glue squeeze out. I don't want a whole lot. All right, I'm going to set this aside and then I'm going to start working on the aprons for the table. I have the pieces here for the front, the sides, and the back. Now the first change that I made to the table was originally the front was a solid piece of wood with the drawer openings cut out of it. And that can be kind of tricky to do. So I decided to go with some 3/4 inch stock, so 1x4, and again some 3/4 inch stock, and this will get glued up together. Now this size comes out to be 5 inches, which is smaller than the 1x6 that I've got for the sides and back. So I had to shave some of that down to get it all even. What I want to do next is the top is going to be attached a little bit different than what we've done. This is a traditional way. There's going to be a groove that's going to go on the top of all these pieces. And then these little buttons. The button will slide into the groove, and then a screw will go through this button up into the tabletop. What this does is it'll hold the tabletop on firm, but allow the wood to expand and contract through the seasons. So, to make this groove, I'm going to use our router table. And the setup for this is I have a 1/4 inch bit in the router. The height of the bit comes up a 1/4 inch. And then I have the fence sitting back 1/2 inch. With that set up, now I'm going to make a groove on the tops of each of these pieces. I've got 2 more to do, and then I'm going to glue this up, set aside to dry, and start working on the legs next. I've been busy working on the legs. What I have here is some 2x2 stock material that I picked up from the big box store. The 2x2 actually comes out to be 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And I've cut it to length already. And I need to taper the legs here. And that's what I've already done with these. But I've made another change to this. On the original, it goes from 3/4 inch and tapers all the way up to 1.5 inches. But that poses a problem when I go to put the apron on. You'll notice that gap. In order to get rid of that gap and make sure everything is level, well, I have to cut the apron at like less than 1 degree. And that's too complicated. To make it simpler, I'm going to measure up 18 inches for the taper. That way, when I put the apron on, it's nice and square. So let me show you now how I'm going to do the taper on the leg. Measured up to 18 inches, made a mark all the way around, and now I'm going to measure in 3/8 on each side. Now I'm just going to transfer these lines to the other side. And with the framing square, I'm going to place it on the marks and take it up to this line. Okay, that's the material that I need to remove. And if you had a bandsaw or a joiner, you could probably do it very quick and easy, but for my application, I'm just going to use a hand plane, and I'm going to shave down to that line. I'm going to start making small strokes here, and slowly work back till I'm cutting that whole line out, flip it over, do the other side, and then I'm going to go back and remark to do the other two. So I have 2 of the tapers done on this leg, and I need to do 2 more because when I turn it, well, it still looks like a square blank. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to mark 3/8 of an inch in. Bring these marks up to the face here. Just like before, I'm going to use the hand plane and plane down to that, but make sure as you're planing that you're checking to make sure that your pieces are still coming out square. After I get this done, I'm going to bring the apron pieces back in and start attaching the legs to those. I've been busy attaching the aprons to the legs, and the method I'm using, well, I'm actually using 2 methods here. I'm using some dowel pins on it. I like the dowel pins because it's going to help get it centered in the middle of the leg. Also, with the glue on it, it's going to add some strength. But I'm also using pocket screws. The pocket screws are really going to add a lot of strength and move this project along quickly. Now it's important that you do the sides first before you put the front and back on. The reason being is, if I did the front and back first, I'd never have room to get the drill in here for those pocket screws. Okay, now the top is probably dry enough that I could put it on, but I'm not at this point because I'm going to work on the drawers next, and it's going to make it a whole lot easier to fit the drawers with that top off. This is the drawer that we're going to be making for the table, and it's called a partial overlay drawer. What that means is that the front of the drawer, this lip, is a little bit wider than the actual opening. Also, too, you can see that the sides come in and connect into our drawer front. So I have to make this rabbet joint here, and we're going to do that on the router table. Now I have the pieces already cut to length, and it's just some 1/2 inch by 4 inch poplar that I got. The router table is set up with a 1/4 inch bit in it, and the height is also set up at a 1/4 inch. Now the depth back, I have it set at 3/8. Now I'm going to make multiple passes with this, just a little bit at a time, and then I'll continue doing the other pieces. Okay, a little sandpaper to clean up these fuzzy edges, and that'll be fine. Now I'm going to repeat it on the back of this as well as the other side piece. And then I have to reset up the router to make a groove for the bottom. I'll show you that next. So the rabbets on the end are done, and what I need to do next is put a groove in it. The groove is what's going to allow our bottom to slide in. So I had to do a couple of slight adjustments. The router bit, the depth of it, that didn't change at all. All I had to do was move the fence back a little bit. It went from 3/8 to 1/2 inch. Okay, now I'm going to make some passes. So the side pieces, they are done. As for the back, well, I'm going to revisit that because the back isn't going to need any router work done. What I'm going to focus now on is the drawer front. And there's several setups for this. So let me get it all set up, adjusted, and I'll tell you the step and procedure for doing that. The front for our drawer is some 3/4 inch stock. And the first cut that I need to do on the router is this rabbet cut. This is going to provide a place for the drawer to attach as well as that partial overlay to kind of cover up the opening on our drawer. So I have the fence reset back to 5/8 of an inch. And the height I raised up to 3/8. And now I'll make my passes. Okay, again, some sandpaper or file to clean up these little bit of fuzzies left behind. And I'm going to readjust the fence and set it up to make this pass here for the lip. So I've readjusted the fence because I need to take an 1/8 inch off each one of these sides. And here's a nice little tip for you. I found the exact center of my router and I marked it at both ends for my fence. So since I have a 1/4 inch bit in there, by placing the fence right in line with the middle, I'm only going to be taking off my 1/8 inch. The last groove I have to put on this is going to be for the drawer. So once again, I readjusted it. I have the bit coming up 1/4 of an inch, and I have the fence moved back 5/8 of an inch. And now I'll make the groove. So all the routing on the inside of the drawer front is done, and now I'm going to change the bit and set it up to give it this profiled thumbnail routing edge to it. I've changed the router bit in here to this profiled one. Now, a couple things I had to do with it. You'll notice that there's a bearing on this. That bearing is actually going to help prevent burning of the wood when I pass the piece through. Also, that bearing needs to be in line with the fence. Now, you've probably been noticing that I've been making all the cross routing cuts first and then going through and make the ones with the grain. The reason for that is, as the bit comes through, it's going to want to explode and break out some of that end grain. If I do that first, well, I should be able to conceal it when I take off the edge going with the grain. Also, to help with eliminating some of that tear out is a sacrificial board placed onto my sled. All right, so let me route this on all 4 edges. Well, it should eliminated some of the burn. I got a little on there. Maybe it's not as sharp as I would like. But that's not a problem because I'm going to use a little sandpaper and clean this up, and then I'll bring the other pieces in and start gluing the drawer together. I'm ready to start putting the drawer together. And I cut the back ahead of time according to the dimensions on my plans. And this back should be the same size as this part of the drawer front. And as you can see, the drawer front is a little bit smaller now. I obviously took too much off when I was routing that, but that's okay because that's going to affect the overall size of the drawer. If the drawer is smaller, well, I have a way to adjust for that when I set up the glides. But if the drawer was too wide, well, I'd have a lot harder time fitting it in. So I'm not worried about that. So I went ahead and I cut a new back piece. I also had to rip it down because the back is where the bottom is going to slide in, and I had to leave access for that. So the procedure that I would do in gluing this up, I'd put the back pieces, I'd put the back to the side pieces, and put a clamp on it. I'm going to keep the back so it's aligned with the top part of that groove. Again, the bottom is going to slide in from there. Then I can put the front on, and again put another clamp, and make sure I use my tape measure to check diagonally to make sure that the whole thing is square. And if you get the bottom just right to the size of the grooves, when you put the bottom in, that also helps square it up. Okay, I'm going to show you next now how I'm going to fit the drawers into the actual table. I'm getting ready to fit the drawers in. What I've already done here is I put these pieces in. It's some 1x4, and they're pocket screwed to the front and back. What this is going to do is going to be the bottom for what the drawers are going to glide on. Now when I put them in, I want to make sure that I keep it flush with that front opening. Now, the bottom of that is taken care of, but we have another issue to contend with. When I put my drawer in, Well, I don't have anything to control it from side to side, and I have this slop in there. Plus, it's going to make trying to pull the drawer in and out just really cumbersome. So the way we'll fix that is with a couple of these scrap pieces of wood to make some guides. Now when I put the drawer in, it goes in a lot smoother. So let me show you how I set that. First, I'm just going to eyeball the distance of the gap on both sides of this drawer. So I'm going to try and get it right in the middle. That looks pretty good. And just to make sure that the drawer doesn't move, I'm going to put the spring clamp from the back of the drawer to the back of the table. Now I have some 3/4 inch stock with a couple of holes in it. And I'm going to place this one in, and I'm going to place it tight against the drawer as I put a couple of screws in. Okay, for the other side, I don't want it too tight against that because it might be too much friction. Oh, here it is. So I'm just going to use a dollar bill and place that between the drawer and the glide. Now my drawer is working good. Okay, I'm going to bring the top back in, and I'm going to route an edge on that, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to attach it to the rest of the table. So I've got the top out of the clamps, and I cut it to the actual final dimensions. Now I want to put a nice round over on it. So I have my handheld router here with a 1/2 inch round over bit. And it also has that bearing again that's going to ride along the edge of our board. Now I did a couple of test cuts to get the profile the way I wanted it and have it locked into size now. Now you're probably wondering, why am I using the handheld and not my router table? Well, because of how long this is, I was afraid when I was going to route on the end grain that I just wasn't going to have good support. So I decided to go this route. So I'm going to do the one side and then flip it over and do the other side. I have the table upside down, and I took a little bit of time to measure to find the middle for this. I measured front to back and side to side, so this is centered on there. Now I'm actually ready to fasten the table to the top. And as I mentioned before in the beginning, I'm going to use these little buttons to hold it down. Now I made these fairly simple. So I made it just with some 1/2 inch material, and then I made this rabbet cut on it with the router table. And that's simply just going in 1/4 inch and 1/4 inch down. Then I sectioned off equal spacing, drilled a pilot and clearance hole, and then I can just cut these off individually. Now I'm going to actually attach it. So I'll take one of these buttons and slide it into the groove. And with the screw, I'll attach it. So I'm going to add a few more to the back, the front, and even a couple on the sides. At this point, I'm ready to sand it and put my stain and finish on it. As I mentioned before in the beginning, I'm going to stain this with my homemade dark ebony stain. With it being black, I've also decided to change the pulls on it. I think this brushed nickel will look great against the black stain. Now, if you're wondering what I used on the original one, well, this was cherry, and I used a red chestnut stain. And for the finish, I used a lacquer. I like the lacquer on this because the lacquer, in my opinion, is more clear than the polyurethane. An oil-based polyurethane sometimes tends to look a little yellow. Now, because this is cherry, it's not going to stay this color for long. Here's why. Cherry wood has the tendency to actually darken when it's exposed to light. You can see the difference in that just from it sitting for a day in the shop. Imagine this inside the house next to a window. So I have to be careful that I don't place objects on it in one place for too long, or it's going to leave its mark. However, with the poplar, I'm not going to have that kind of problem. Well, I hope you enjoy this project. For me, it brought back many memories in my home. And I think for you and your family, a table like this will make some memories too. We'll see you next time right here on I Can Do That.